The thing we're talking about today is the evolution of digital transformation, data and development. So not an unmeaty topic, and hopefully to goodness, one that we can keep people interested in. Today, folks, you will see a couple of speakers, so they'll join Wayne in a moment. We're just swapping them across in StreamYard sessions. So we're going to meet Antti, who runs an open source software development company, Open Source RPA, making the headlines recently as absolutely one of the, if not one of the biggest things, Wayne, I think you'll agree, to happen in the RPA space in a while, and probably reflective of a very maturing market where we see open source software happening. We'll meet Olly in a moment as well, who works in AI in healthcare. And Olly himself works along the lines of trying to get more medical staff more time with their patients as well by using AI and automation. And then, Wayne, I don't know if we should introduce you or not, on the basis that I think most people know you. I'm not suggesting you've been around the industry for many years, but you have. I think I first, and this is maybe a surprise to you, I first read about you maybe about 5 or 6 years ago in a book by Leslie Wilcox. He was identifying you as a leader in the automation space way back, many years ago, when you started out in a large company and started to work with the technologies themselves. Do I remember it right?
It was a decade ago when I first started, so I don't like to talk about that because I still see myself as a sprightly 23-year-old most of the time, but unfortunately I'm not, as the grey hairs are beginning to show. But yes, very much so. This has been a passion for a long time. It's amazing to see how this industry has grown from those early days, and of course, having seen the evolution of RPA into intelligent automation, into hyper automation, and obviously the continued progress that we've seen in the world of AI, and all of this crashing together in this world of delivering business value through the use of technology is fantastic. So yeah, great to be here, and obviously I'll try and keep talking while we wait for everybody else to join us. But I know we have a great topic and discussion today. So real pleasure to be here, and obviously always brilliant to speak with yourself. And as much as I've been in this industry a while, you've certainly written a hell of a lot more in even a year than I will have done in the last decade. So for anyone who knows me, they're very likely to know Kieran, or at least have read one of thousands of pieces that he's written about this particular industry.
I think that maybe shows that I have large quantities of time on my hands more than anything else. But let's see. We'll jump in with you anyway, because I think you and I could talk all day, as we've done in the past. Let's start, if you don't mind. There are what I would say is top 3 vendors, or so-called top 3 vendors. There are top 10 vendors now, and in a market that never existed 10 years ago. And now we're starting to see a lot of open RPA as well. We're starting to see the rise of open source and AI. Can we say the market is matured, advanced? Can we say it's now the right time for open source? Or what's your thoughts in general on the market?
And I had a view, and then I saw a post that Phil First posted a couple of days ago, where he has highlighted, based on 400 execs, what he believes are the most commonly used RPA platforms. And I would think 2 of the top 3 were not who I would have had. It's certainly in the top 5, never mind the top 10. So, this is an interesting market. It's, is it mature? Yes, I would say it probably is a mature or a maturing market. I think the fact that, open source RPA, the number of support capabilities that are moving up alongside the actual technologies themselves is a good indication of whether something is mature. If you can build a business on the coattails of a technology type, then I think that is a good sign of maturity. And there are a number of organizations now that are growing as a result of the continued success of RPA. including one here, Robocorp. So I think that's a good sign of maturity, really. If other organizations, if other businesses can be built on and alongside a technology type, it's generally a good indication that it's maturing.
Antti, myself and Wayne just started anyway. We just jumped in. We're talking about open source RPA. Is open source RPA a credible alternative to the so-called top 3 or top 10? Does it have all of the functionality that those tools have, particularly the robots, particularly artificial intelligence, data analytics? Can we see it as a credible alternative, or is it a nice to have?
Well, hi, Kieran. Hi, Wayne. Great to join here, jumping in straight with a question. So definitely the way we see it is that the capabilities are there technically. So there's really nothing magical about RPA as a technology itself when it comes down to the fundamentals. We've known how to build this level of automation for, let's say, a decade already. So it's really something that we have already in place and is ready to use and ready to be leveraged in large enterprises. As a company at Robocorp, we're obviously building the enterprise layer on top of the open source capabilities that are in there. And when it comes to leveraging AI and intelligent automation, the way we look at it is that you really can't throw a rock in Silicon Valley without hitting like 20 different AI startups. So we want to keep that in mind when we are planning and building an open platform. So integrability is really everything to us. So you want to be able to integrate to the best AI capabilities when those come, and we don't know yet what are going to be the leading AI platforms out there. Certainly we can integrate with things like AWS, Google, and Azure, but as you have all the time new things coming up, you want to be ready to jump in and leverage them in your RPA and really use RPA as the hands of that AI in a sense to get that working across an enterprise. I don't know if I managed to answer everything in the question. I didn't take notes while you were.
No, I think you did, because it's interesting for me because to a degree, open source RPA just suddenly appeared over the last numbers of months. And I know that's not the case because you've been dealing with the open source framework in the background for the last couple of years. And needless to say, someone obviously has a lot of faith in open source technology to put $12 million into your company. So I think, that in itself should be evidence enough. But Wayne, if I could come back to you for a moment, are we looking in the right place with open source RPA or RPA in general? Should we be introducing more machine learning, artificial intelligence? Are the products ready? Does the space need them?
Is that the $1 million question, right? We tend to look at technology a lot of times for answers when often we don't look at ourselves and our process and our people probably in as much detail for those solutions. I have lots of views kind of on the open source space, and obviously we've done quite a lot of preparation for today's session where we spoke about the makeup certainly of Robocorp, and clearly we can do a little bit of a deep dive in there. I think first of all we need to think about what is RPA if we are going to concentrate on RPA. Is it or should it be low code, no code? Should it be the replication of human actions in process? And there's lots of different views on that. I would be very surprised if we didn't hear the word Python a few times during today's conversation. And maybe that's another question that we need to talk about here. There is in my view. And Antti mentioned it, handwork versus headwork. The AI is definitely the headwork. Kieran, I know you call it the clickety-click, the thinkety-think. There's a place for both of these technologies. If we think about, the way that current processes are being run in a business, there's lots of clickety-click, there's lots of handwork, there's certainly a hell of a lot of headwork. And therefore, this amalgamation of technologies in this world of intelligent automation versus RPA is a necessity, right? There are not many organizations so far that will only need RPA. I can't think of one. I can't think of one organization that will only ever need RPA. It's a simple technology. It's a very useful technology. It's a very generic technology, but it is not a panacea for business-wide transformation, in my view. And I've been doing this, for a decade. So I feel like I have enough experience to categorically state that RPA is incredibly important, but is not the only thing you will ever need.
And Wayne, one of the things that was announced a little while ago was that COEs not having a center of expertise or a center of excellence impacted the return on investment from RPA products. With open source tool coming in, machine learning, data analytics, and a whole host of other technologies available now in the market, how do you see the role of the COE evolving or changing?
Great question. And different organizations are definitely looking at this in different ways. In my view, complementary technologies that are working together need to have a way of working, a setup, a governance framework internally that aligns these technologies, aligns the people that are making use of these technologies under a similar umbrella. Now, whether you want to call that center of excellence, center of expertise, whatever you want to call it, if we are talking about intelligent automation, we're talking about hyper automation, we're talking about creating business value, then there needs to be some general consensus, rules of working, process governance models that are aligned. And I think that is, incredibly important. I think it's not a surprise to me that a COE helps increase return on investment, and I think it's for those very reasons of governance and process and doing things the right way in an efficient manner, not replicating, being aligned, all of those things. I mean, they're just common best practice for anything. We can ignore whether we're talking about automation and just talk about, making progress in business. They generally align to those type of principles, and I don't think automation is any different. Yes, it's technology, but it's still following process, and it still has people and process absolutely involved.
Thank you. Antti, if you don't mind me coming back to you just for a moment, based on what Wayne is saying and based on the open source market, how do you see firms evolving in the next couple of years in terms of skills and in terms of tooling and in terms of, to Wayne's point, Python? And there'll be a debate in there somewhere about real coders and not coders coming through as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks. So, just listening to the comments about COEs, I think RPA took a sort of a false start in a sense with the focus on citizen developers, low code or no code platforms. I know that there's certainly levels of business automation that you can do with no code tools, and there's a place for that. But when we talk about things like intelligent automation, we really are talking about people building things on notebooks, like real ML things, and just having them being able to continue with the same notebooks and write it with Python in terms of RPA just makes a lot of sense. And we've really seen at Robocorp, at least, we've really seen wherever we go and talk to companies, the COE-led model is something that comes up more and more, where we see also results happening. So I'm not really surprised by that the study that shows that COE-led models are taking, are showing better results overall. And in terms of the technology, really, I think we are at the point where digital workers or these agent-based automation solutions, they should be considered as something that are part of every IT department's stack of tools. So it's a tool in the tool belt that they can deploy and use anywhere. And so it just makes sense to have that be something that's not a a vendor specific low code thing that you can only deploy in that vendor's intended manner, but instead do it with standard environments like Python. I often put AI, ML, analytics, and automation next to each other, and all of those follow, Python, 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 like we heard here. So that's the way that we are looking at it.
And do you think, if we talk about Python, let's be honest here momentarily. Hi, Olly. We'll bring you in a moment if you don't mind. We just jumped on ahead. If we talk about Python, then that will scare a lot of people. And being honest here, we talk about citizen developers, but not everyone can be a coder. And therefore, is there a little bit of something in the market that says there are tools for coders and there are low code and no code tools that allow folks to drive okay automations or sophisticated automations, but there'll never be a link between the two. They will always remain separate?
Well, I mean, there's levels of coding involved and scripting. So we see these tools that we are building as frameworks that make it easy and simple for people to pick them up and start using and leveraging them in making automation. So you don't have to be like a full stack engineer to build something and make it work. There's frameworks and ways of working. So you need to know something about IT systems. You cannot start with an, just blank slate. You need to have an understanding where you should and can leverage an API, where you can leverage a database, and where you should go through the user interface and do the click there. So that level of understanding, when you start with something like that, and then bring in frameworks that make it easy and simple to actually get something done really fast, then you get into good results. And we want to keep the barrier of entry really low. So instead of having you to know Python, we actually have people coming into Robocorp who don't know how to write Python, but they actually learn in the process, kind of get upskilled that way. So I don't want to draw a tight barrier. You're a full stack, software engineer, or then you cannot, create automation. Is simply not true anymore.
Olly, if you don't mind, we introduced earlier on as working in the health sector and freeing people up to spend more time with their patients. What are you seeing in the health sector, and particularly with the tools that have been introduced to automate and digitize and transform health operations using data? Are they low code, high code, a mixture of code, or where are the tools sitting and fitting, and how is the health industry benefiting?
Yeah, firstly, thank you for having me on, and thank you for doing the introduction for me there, Kieran. It was probably more succinct than the version I would have given, so thank you very much. So yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think that in healthcare at the moment, what we're seeing is and yeah, Antti, I think I was going to come back on Antti's point actually, and just say that I think it isn't a one size fits all, and I think that's what you're saying there, Antti. And I think what you're doing at Robocorp is really interesting, and perhaps we'll have a chance to talk about that in a short while again. I think in healthcare. Healthcare's always traditionally been a industry that's been sort of, a little bit behind the times. You only have to go into your local GP. I think, are you over in New York, Antti? I'm not sure where everyone's from, but in the UK, and I think it's fairly universal across healthcare. It's a little bit different in the US, but generally speaking, healthcare tends to be, especially when it's state-run, which is we know, without getting into too much, is obviously all for a very good reason. Free healthcare is an amazing thing to be able to provide. However, unfortunately, in a lot of countries, it tends to be a bit behind the times. So, and the same is going on with. Sorry, I was going to say, just to give an example, you walk into like a local GP or a doctor's surgery clinic, and often, I always say it's like going back sort of 15 years in time. The way things are run, there's still a lot of paperwork, despite the NHS here in the UK making certain targets to be paperless, by that date. I think when it came and went, I think in 2019 or 2020, if I'm not mistaken. So there's still even actual paper in the system, and there's lots of letters being sent around. The communications between patient and the service providers is not great. There is an explosion of digital health apps happening, to the point where there's now a regulatory a private company called Orca that is actually reviewing apps and things in healthcare, and they've sort of doubled their headcount this year up to sort of they've added 50 people to their company here in the UK. So there is this real explosion in the market of digitalization of healthcare, but on the ground there's still there's a lot. We're still nowhere near at the point where we're seeing all of that come through. There's lots of innovation happening, but it's not really trickling down to it's not fully operationalized yet, I think it's fair to say. In terms of, to answer your question more specifically, sort of building up to that, healthcare is also behind again in automation in many ways. We got into healthcare at Alphalake because we saw automation, as I call it, just simply process automation, as an area that can drive a lot of meaningful, measurable results in an industry that is plagued with being often inefficient. So yeah, we first came in as sort of RPA, looking at purely RPA. And then over time, we started to look now a lot more at sort of connector-based automation. But the industry is only really waking up now to RPA, pure sort of, and typically low code RPA, to answer your question, Kieran. So, the big three, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism and UiPath have made the most gains in the UK and I think, globally in healthcare. Blue Prism are ahead in certainly in the UK in terms of how many sort of NHS sites they're into. These are all low code platforms. We at Alphalake partner with Automation Anywhere, but we try not to focus too much on the platform, but more sort of the program of change and driving efficiency into how we actually enable that process automation. More recently, we worked with a platform partner called Workato, who are a connector-based automation, which is really where we see most of the efficiency happening. But yeah, it's mainly low code. Workato we would describe as no code. But I think what Antti's doing with Robocorp is very interesting in healthcare, because I think it depends on the situation. It depends on the requirement, and I think I see this sort of open source approach to RPA as just really a maturing of the market. But in healthcare, we are still, as an industry, still quite fixated on the buzzword of RPA, and it's this kind of it serves as a bit of a magnet and a bit of a thing that we can gravitate around because people understand it, and we all love a 3-letter acronym. I think the joke is I effing hate TLAs, but they do kind of help people to get a sense of what the way we communicate as human beings. We need to pass on some sort of terminology, and I think RPA as an industry is sort of as a result of that. It's something that people can get. It's a frame of reference that people understand. But I think I'm curious as to whether or not we're going to see RPA as a term morph into modern RPA and become the term that we all get behind, or whether or not RPA will die out as a term and we will find obviously a new term at some point. But I often talk in healthcare as GUI based RPA, and that's what most of and most of that is a low code tool to deliver that GUI based RPA.
We're not short of acronyms.
Answers your question.
It does.
We're not short of acronyms, yeah.
Well, we're not short of acronyms in the automation industry, I can tell you that much. So I've heard
Absolutely,
low code, high code, no code, RPA, AI. Wayne, listening to what we're saying so far, are we in danger of forgetting the end customer or the end employee as we get so excited about the technology and the terms and everything linked together?
I'll come off mute. There is always a risk, right? And I think if we were to look at RPA, I think it's incorrectly to talk about RPA as a technology. I think of RPA more as a capability, and that capability is, a technical capability. It's also a people capability. It's a mindset shift. Something I've been very very aware of, I think, from the early days was that making use of this type of technology is more than just using the tech. It's a change. It's a change in in the way of working. It's a change that an enterprise, an entire business needs to undergo, and it's a significant effort from a change management perspective. And things like process and change management and mindset. These are all people capabilities. These are all things that people need to do. Whether it be end customer, whether it be user, whether it be beneficiary of the capability. So I think there's always a risk that, and I would think the industry probably has gone a little bit too techy, because if you think about the embryonic RPA world, it was all about putting technology in the hands of people who know process. Now we're very much focused on it's a technical capability, it's a technology. There's an industry, it's a software industry. It kind of is and it isn't, right? Of course, it is a software industry, but actually the foundations of RPA are so much more than just making use of a tech or a software. It is, for me, those who've been really successful have changed the mindset and the way of working within the organization where RPA has been successful. And it's not just the technology, it's everything that surrounds it. So there's always a worry, especially when we start getting into acronyms. And we've heard a lot today. The fundamental foundations for me have got to be that it's a capability. It's there to help create business value. You can define business value in many, many ways. But of course, we need to bring the people on the journey. And those people are the people that this affects, the people that are involved. And that's, from the management team all the way down to the people actually doing the do. So yeah, it absolutely has to be a journey that everybody has to be on. And culture eats strategy for business. And if you haven't got the right culture, doesn't matter how great this technology is, you will not be successful. Very, very rarely would you be successful. So definitely a journey. People absolutely at the center of it, even though you're making use of tech.
Yeah. Olly, if I could come back to you then, do you see AI as the future of healthcare, or do you see people as the future of healthcare? You're on mute, sir. We all do it, by the way, all the same. We'll do mute bingo. Antti, you're next.
Yeah, we haven't quite got the AI automation to recognise the fact my mouth is moving to move me off mute yet, but that will be coming, I'm sure. If anyone wants to take that idea forward. So yeah, I think in healthcare, I see if you're talking sort of time frames, I think where we're seeing most AI and actual machine-led, training happening in healthcare at the moment. Healthcare is really exciting. We got into it before the pandemic. We launched in the beginning of 2019, but it's a very obviously, because of the pandemic, it's even more fast-tracked in some of the innovations we've seen coming through in terms of digital technologies out of necessity, just like any other industry. So some of the things that a lot of us have been crying out for a long time in healthcare, just as users of healthcare, as technologists who use healthcare, and people that work in the industry, that's now sort of been, really catalyzed. And we're seeing most of the AI come through as areas in sort of radiology, so image recognition, and some of the on the intelligent automation side, some of the sort of AI based OCR from the likes of IQbot and things like that from Automation Anywhere, where you can train that that bot the platform to be able to read. As I always say, you know where the quantity column, a quantity column is wherever it is on the screen, because it's been trained from enough variability. A lot of the time, though, a lot of that is that needs to be worth it. It needs to be worth doing that. 80% of the gains can come from without even looking at some of those more advanced capabilities. 80% of your invoices and purchase orders or whatever that might be are probably, not that variable. You can probably, it's probably quicker sometimes and more effective and more efficient to go in and sort of, just throw the 40 different supplier POs or invoices at it and just sort of tackle that. So I think a bit of common sense is needed when you get into sort of talking about AI. Same for chatbots. I was talking to a lady yesterday. We're seeing diagnostic chatbots. Companies like Babylon Health have come under a bit of flack for their chatbot not detecting that a 60-year-old smoker presenting with lung symptoms or breathing symptoms wasn't detected as possible, signposted to possible lung cancer and things like that. So there's always, and that's actually the problem. It's the ability to train it on enough variable realistic data with enough volume, and that's one of the issues in healthcare. How do we get enough real, or as close to, whether it's synthesized or certainly realistic data that's variable enough to train things like chatbots. So, but on the chatbot point, what I was going to say was actually a lot of the time, just a common sort of tree logical chat flow using sort of some sensible sort of tree diagram logic is actually a lot of the time more effective. So the way I see sort of where AI is going is, if we can tackle, you shouldn't be distracted by AI. I think there's a lot of technology out there, the buzz of it, we want to do everything using AI, and I know this is sort of we have Alphalake.ai, so we do focus on AI, but we use it sparingly, I think is the word, in the right dosage. And I think there's too much of a rush and too much of a hurry sometimes to try and use AI technologies, when actually you didn't need AI. You just needed some common sense and a little bit of, an experienced, pair of hands, driving it. And I think that's the same for a lot of process automation. Sometimes process automation can be the same. Where I see it going, just to summarize, in terms of over the next 10 years, take sort of machine-led image recognition. Will that be something that guides the radiologist, for example, and shows them with a few circles, these are the points you need to be looking at? Or will the radiologist refer to an AI tool that can validate and double check? So it'll be interesting to see, whether AI, but it's very much going to be an assisted AI, in healthcare over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. And then I think, and that's why I talk a lot about semi-autonomous. I think we're going to be semi-autonomous for a while. And then I think, maybe 10 years from now, and it takes 10, 15 years for anything to come through. So, I think 10, 15 years from now, hopefully things will start to be able to be actually autonomous, and we can just all relax, right?
I think that it's an honest admission of the AI industry, if that makes sense, Olly.
Yeah, it's buzzy.
Everybody gets excited. It's hearing us now, and they forget all the hard work it gets there. Antti, if you don't mind, I'll come to you. Are there shining examples? We've talked a lot of words, we've talked a lot of theory, we've talked about what's coming, but are there shining examples of companies that are using data, AI, RPA, that really are setting the standard for everyone else?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I like to focus on the actual outcomes and not the technology itself as much, even though I'm a technology as kind of fundamental nature. But, really the way we are seeing it at our company is that, those users typically do the best who understand their own processes. So it really comes down to what Wayne was saying, that RPA is a capability as such, and the people who know the processes really matter at the end of the day. So RPA works the same way as AI. It's garbage in and garbage out. If you don't understand your processes, it's really hard to engage with RPA and try to surprise, like with magic, make it better. So that kind of process excellence and understanding how things work inside a company, and understanding the right way, like right places where you want to apply RPA, want to apply AI, that really makes a whole world of difference at the end of the day. When you're jumping into a project where we want to start automating things, we've seen so many failed projects that started out with great enthusiasm, but we go into development or some of our partners go into development, and the customer all of a sudden realizes that, oh yeah, the data that we specified to you, that was just 5% of the actual reality. In the real world, 95% of our cases are actually different from the data that we provided you as an input. So treating it as a magic box that would solve your fundamental problem with your actual processes, whether that's incoming data, something else. Probably other practitioners see this too, but that's the reality. You only can do, like we talk about automating mission critical routines with RPA, but you need to understand what those routines are and how they're defined and how they should work at the end of the day. Again, on mute.
You're muted now, Kieran.
No,
we definitely need that tool.
I haven't been there yet.
Well, Antti, we need you just to pretend. We need the AI to switch this off as soon as someone starts talking, or maybe the AI is clever enough to keep me from talking. But Wayne, I was conscious we haven't seen that bow tie in a little while. And I wanted to ask you a question. What types of businesses are automating? The press seems to think it's everyone. Are there leaders? Are there laggards? What's the reality of the world from your perspective?
Now that is a difficult question. Is everybody doing it? I think most people are. I think if you were to look at latest stats that I've seen, 92% of organizations above a certain size have at least done something. I would think that's fairly accurate, probably a little bit on the high side, I would say. The difference is doing something versus doing something meaningful. And to Antti's point, creating business value, right? Sustainable business value. I work with some very well-known financial service institutions who have done amazing work. I worked for a couple of telcos who've made some fantastic progress. But then I work with a lot of organizations who are just starting out, and there are certainly leaders and there are certainly laggards. From an industry perspective, I would think, the world of manufacturing kind of comes to mind. E-commerce to a degree, I'm seeing, not necessarily the big guys, but certainly some of the smaller organizations that have significantly grown over the last kind of 12, 24 months, certainly the last 12 months as a result of COVID. Maybe didn't see automation as much of a priority as what they do now, because they've had to grow. And where they may have thought about factory automation historically, now they realize that they actually need to remove the reliance on people to service their customers in the back end. So there is there's lots of industries that are making progress. I think financial services is and has been seen as a leader. But even financial services is many different types of organization, and there's certainly leaders, banking as one example, and laggards, of which there will be a kind of a few different industry types. But yeah, I feel like now most people who want to they're either on the journey, they've kicked off the discussions, or they have started. But those that have achieved true value, I feel, are still reasonably small, growing, but still small in comparison to those that have started.
Interesting. There was a statement a couple of months ago. It was one of these funny conversations on LinkedIn that said, what has caused transformation? Is it the CFO, the CHRO? Is it the IT team, or is it COVID? And I'm kind of thinking it was COVID that's driving a lot of people toward, or at least the sound like they're heading towards automation anyway. It'd be good to see. I'm an absolute fan of automation, augmenting people and freeing people up to work with customers and helping staff as well be happy. But let me take it in turns for each of you just for the last moment, if you don't mind. A quick 1 minute each. Where do you each see the future of the open source /AI /RPA market moving in the next 3 to 5 years? And if I could begin with Olly, and then I'll come to Antti.
Okay, I see the market shifting far more towards the low no-code side of the market, and so it's good to draw that distinction, because obviously what Robocorp is also very interesting. Very interested to see where it goes in offering that alternative approach. But in the low-code, no-code side of the market, I see it shifting heavily to the connected automation approach, which more robust automation and process flow, so which enables the processes to work with less dependency on obviously graphical user interfaces and human interaction with the normal process. Obviously, the human will still trigger and be involved at various steps, but that semi-autonomous approach's outcome is far more quickly realised if you go via the connector-based approach to automation. I think so. We'll see the big guys. You're already seeing it. We're going to shift more and more towards APIs and low coding and no coding the API, and not low coding and no coding the GUI based RPA. So I think that's the general shift we're going to see. But just on one final very quick point, and it will be quick, was I think increasingly on what you're saying, Kieran, what we're seeing in healthcare, and I think across industries, is people in the line of business that are we talk about democratizing, but that is actually happening. People are now asking, whether it's in HR, whether it's in finance, how do we automate that? And I think that's the shift. That's when the industry's sort of done. Half the battle is won, because we're seeing that in line of business. Obviously, software as a service has helped push that as well, with more tools being readily available. But yeah, just on that other point, I think how do we automate this is a question that is now on the lips of people in across organisations, and I think that's only going to be a good thing in terms of enabling humans to do more creative things that our brains are better suited for, is what it's all about, right?
Thank you. Antti, over to you, if you don't mind. Quick 60 seconds. Where do you see the market moving in the next 3 to 5 years, sir?
Yeah, well, the same way as Olly, I see that connector-based automation is going to be a part of it. But the way we see it is the type of thing that gets you 80% there. And you want to combine something like general purpose RPA, like we are building, to augment and complement connector-based. So we're going to see both approaches mixing up and being able to provide rapid solutions that can actually take you 100% there in terms of capabilities. And also see that there's going to be a lot of consolidation on the market for sure. It's already happening. But what we're going to also hopefully see is that we are not in, let's say, 3 years' time, we're not anymore so reliant and focused on these mammoth platforms. I want to incorporate everything under one umbrella of RPA, AI, or what have they at the time. So it's more of a, you take the software robot or the digital worker as a skill, a capability, like something from like Robocorp. Then you combine it to connector-based automation platform, and then you combine it with an automation solution, a point solution there to build this unified automation solution, instead of working inside a huge monolithic platform where you need to rely only on the capabilities that platform can provide. Muted
again, Kieran. I totally agree with you, Antti. I'll use the opportunity while Kieran's muted.
I actually unmuted.
I snuck in there, Kieran, while you're muted.
Yeah, I thought I'll unmute and then I'll be ready. And then for some reason I muted again. It must be to stop myself talking. Wayne, where do you see the open source / RPA / IA market moving in the next numbers of years, sir?
Do you know what? I think I'm going to say something very different to the guys. I'm almost worried that the more complex we make it, the more it shifts back into the realm of IT. Right, we started. If you think about it, whether you want to call it shadow IT or something else, but taking a technology and a capability, taking it away from traditional IT, putting it in operations, because there's no code, low code. We're able to use technology properly for the first time, without having to be in IT. My worry is, the more, even if it's low code, no code, pipe, whatever it is, my worry is the more complex we make it, and we are making it more complex. Let's be honest. The more technologies we add in, the more integrations there are, the more things that can go wrong, the more we have to monitor, the more we have to govern. We're making it more IT centric, more IT based than operational based. And I think over the next 3 to 5 years, we may see this move back into traditional means of IT, and maybe that means that there are new technologies that come into operations to take its place. This might be one of the first times that the cycle has moved from operations back into IT versus IT into operations. So that's what we might see over the next 3 to 5 years. I think it'll be an interesting journey, but I think we're adding more complexity. Even though we're making some of these tools pretty simple, I feel like we are creating more of a IT type problem than we are fixing operational issues. And I think that is going to be interesting to see over the next few years what actually happens, and actually how much control traditional IT want to take back from operations as we continue to really push the boundaries on what no code, low code, open source technologies are enabling us to do.
Interesting. And this time I've got my off mute ready to go as well. Let me try and summarize a little bit, because boy, that was a tour de force for the last 45 minutes. So I think what I'm hearing is, look, open source is a thing. It will definitely impact the top 3. It'll be a part of people's toolkit. And within the toolkit that folks have in organizations, there'll be AI, RPA, and a host of other technologies. The challenge will be, at the moment, the business is driving a lot of this. There isn't a lot of what you were describing, Wayne, as current IT ownership, but we could see that coming back to the fore. Maybe the business will want to hand it back. Having held the reins, they'll realize maybe we don't want the technology. The interesting bit is the low-code space. And that movement I've seen develop over the last couple of years, where there isn't enough, let's be honest, IT people in the world, or software engineers. Maybe the odd business person might disagree, but there isn't enough in the world. And people themselves are coming with far greater skills these days. So I'm almost seeing this push and pull between the low code space to allow people to have the productivity and the tools that they need to do the work that they need. And that's RPA and AI and everything else in between. And you're seeing the business potentially handing back the reins to IT, because Antti, maybe the Python world is going to remain dominant. As someone once said to me, can you have a citizen hygienist and a citizen dentist, treating me? I know which I'd want in the right circumstances. Both actually work. But whether I'd want a citizen dentist who's just learned how to do it in the last couple of days treating me, I'm not necessarily too sure to go. Interesting space. I have to say, I'm fascinated by RPA and IA. I can't wait to see what's going to happen now in the next 3 to 5 years. I think things will move even quicker. I wish each every success, Wayne, from the consulting and everything else point of view. Please keep delivering the great work you're doing. Antti, thank you so much from the open source RPA space. I really see this as a sign of mature market when I start to see open source coming in. I'm glad you and I got to talk not that long ago and dispelling some of the myths, and would recommend some people look at those as well and introduce themselves to your product. Olly, AI in healthcare, I have to say, if anybody deserves technology and tooling, it's the healthcare and the health service. We've seen over the last year the absolute angels and dedicated people that exist and work long hours. The more we can augment them at the right time with the right technology, the better. And I wish you and your business every success in the future. And I wish all of you the best.